Amidst the luxury of a first-class flight, an invisible war begins, when a famous CEO unexpectedly finds that discrimination and insults will push him into a merciless confrontation with both airline staff and social media. The flight from New York to London took off late one afternoon as a fiery sunset tinged the clouds outside the window. The Boeing 787's luxurious first-class cabin was designed with soft leather seats, and the soft lighting from the ceiling lamps created a warm feeling but could not hide the simmering tension in the air. The roar of the engines was a steady rhythm, but for those in the cabin, it only added to the invisible pressure. Elijah Carter, 38, sat in seat 1A, the most prestigious seat in first class. He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar technology corporation, known for his uncompromising leadership style and bold decisions that had propelled him to the top of his career. His perfectly tailored black suit hugged his body, his shiny leather shoes reflected the light, and his deep blue eyes always shone with a sharpness that seemed to see through everything. But behind that powerful exterior was a lonely man, and few dared to approach him because of his coldness and demanding nature. Facing him was Lauren Hayes, 29, a flight attendant with more than 5 years of experience. She wore a ponytail, a tight navy blue uniform, and a professional smile, but her eyes were filled with barely concealed discontent. Lauren had loved the job, dreamed of flying around the world, but the long shifts, the pressure from passengers, and the unfairness of the work environment had turned her bitter. When she saw Elijah board the plane with such arrogance, she had a premonition that this shift would be a big test. The flight passed an hour in false silence. Lauren pushed the drink cart to Elijah's area, her hands shaking slightly from exhaustion from her previous shift. She leaned over, forced a smile, and said in a falsely sweet voice, "Sir, here is the glass of red wine you requested. We hope you enjoy our service." But as she handed him the glass, a slight jolt of the plane sent a few drops of wine splashing onto Elijah's pristine white shirt. Tiny red streaks spread across the fabric like dripping blood, and Elijah looked up, his eyes cold. He slowly put the iPad down on the table, wiped his hands with a tissue, in a slow but forceful motion, and said, "Do you know how much this shirt costs? It was handmade in Italy, and I don't think a flight attendant like you can appreciate its value. Or do you think this is a joke to entertain me on this long flight?" Lauren kept her smile on, but inside, anger was starting to simmer. She had endured enough unreasonable complaints from passengers over the past week, and now Elijah's tone was like a spark that ignited her frustration. She replied, her voice laced with sarcasm but still trying to be polite. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to stain your expensive suit. Perhaps you should be more careful on such low-cost flights? Or should I bring an apron for you to protect it?" Elijah frowned, not used to this polite yet sarcastic attitude. He tilted his head, looked Lauren up and down as if assessing her, then gritted his teeth. "You should know your place. I don't pay this airline to listen to the banter of someone like you. Do your job and don't test my patience." Lauren turned away, pushing the drink cart back, muttering loud enough for Elijah to hear, the kind of person who thinks the world revolves around her. How pitiful. Elijah clenched his fists, his eyes piercing her. He took a deep breath, trying to contain his anger, but the thought of teaching her a lesson was already forming in his mind. She continued to serve other passengers, but each time she passed Elijah, she deliberately stepped harder, letting the sound of her shoes ring out as a small provocation. Elijah noticed this, and his silence became more terrifying than ever. He told himself, "She will pay for this attitude." The conflict didn't stop there. When Lauren returned to serve the meal, she continued to feign politeness, placing the tray of food in front of Elijah with a forced smile. "Here is your meal, Mr. Carter. I hope it is to your taste. I have checked carefully not to spill any more on your precious coat." But then she straightened up, folded her arms, and said in a clear, distinct voice, no longer hiding her contempt, "Anyway, I don't understand why someone like you is sitting here. Shouldn't you have your own plane? Or do you just like making things difficult for others to feel powerful? Actually, I don't think you're suited for first class. It's too good for your attitude." Elijah put his knife and fork down on the table, his movements slow but menacing. He stood up, a head taller than Lauren, his voice cold but authoritative. "You are overstepping your bounds. I can make you lose your job with just one phone call. Do you want to try? Or do you think you are important enough to challenge me?" Lauren laughed scornfully, her initial politeness completely gone. She stepped closer, looking straight into Elijah's eyes. "Losing your job? Oh, I am so scared. You can call me, but I will not bow to an arrogant person like you. Who do you think you are? A king on this first-class throne? You are just an arrogant rich man who cares about no one but your money." Elijah tilted his head, his eyes darkening. He replied, his voice as sharp as a knife. "You are a typical example of failure who does not know how to respect others and does not know the value of your work. I built an empire from scratch, and you? You only know how to complain and blame. You do not deserve to be here." Lauren moved closer, pointed at Elijah, and shouted in front of the passengers, "Respect? You don't deserve that word. You're just a rude, arrogant person who knows nothing but how to boss people around. I'd rather serve a dog than serve you. Do you think you're so great? I've met hundreds of people like you who are rich but empty, and who no one truly loves." The surrounding passengers were stunned and began to whisper. A middle-aged man in the back seat shook his head. A young girl took out her phone to record, and an old woman covered her mouth in surprise. Elijah clenched his fists, trying to contain his anger, but Lauren's words were like knives stabbing at his pride. He stepped closer, his voice low but full of menace. "You will regret those words. I am not someone you can insult without paying the price." Lauren did not back down. She smiled faintly, her voice full of challenge. "Then do something to me. Do you dare, or will you just sit there and threaten me?" The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was suffocating, as if a battle was about to break out. The climax came when Elijah, unable to bear it any longer, sat down in a chair and said in a defiant voice, "You want me to leave? I'm not moving unless the crew drags me off. I paid for this seat, and I have every right to sit here. Do whatever you want to me." Lauren, in a fit of rage, shouted publicly in front of the entire cabin, "You don't deserve to sit in first class. A rude, arrogant person like you should be locked in the cargo hold with the luggage. Who do you think you are to demand service? I won't serve you anymore. Get out of here, or I will make you leave." Elijah sneered, his voice sharp as a knife. "You have no right to fire me. I am a customer, and you are just a hostess. Get someone more competent than you here, if you dare." Lauren did not back down. She turned to her colleague nearby, a young woman named Sarah, and ordered, "Call security now. I want this person out of first class." Sarah hesitated, looking at Lauren with concern. "Lauren, are you sure? He is a VIP." But Lauren interrupted. "I said call him now. I don't care who he is." Sarah ran off, and in the meantime Lauren continued to attack Elijah. "Do you think you are so important? You are just a pitiful person, sitting here feeling better than everyone else. I have met all kinds of people like you who are rich, but no one cares if they don't have money. You don't deserve the respect of anyone here." Elijah stood up again, approaching Lauren, his voice low but powerful. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life. I will make sure you have no place in this industry. You think you are strong when you yell at me? No, you are just a weakling who can't control herself." The passengers began to whisper louder. A middle-aged man spoke up. "Miss Stewardess, please calm down." But Lauren ignored him, her eyes blazing at Elijah. A few minutes later, 2 security guards appeared. A tall man with a deep voice said, "Sir, we have received reports of a disturbance. We need you to leave the area to avoid disturbing other passengers." Elijah turned to look at them, his eyes blazing. "You are making a big mistake. I am Elijah Carter, CEO of Carter Tech. I will make this entire airline pay for this insult. I am not going anywhere. If you want me to leave, then just drag me out." But the security guard was undeterred. A second, a woman with a firm voice stepped forward. "Sir, if you do not leave voluntarily, we will be forced to use force. Please cooperate." Elijah clenched his fists, looking at Lauren with a burning gaze. But under the pressure from security and the curious eyes of the passengers, he finally gathered his belongings, iPad, jacket, and left the first-class cabin in awkward silence, under the supervision of 2 security guards. Lauren stood there, breathing heavily, a sense of triumph mixed with anxiety as she realized the consequences that could come to her. After Elijah was taken out of the first-class cabin, the atmosphere in the cabin became chaotic. The passengers began to talk excitedly, their voices echoing like a discordant choir. The middle-aged man in the back row stood up, pointed at Lauren, and said loudly, "What did you just do? He is a VIP. Do you know how this will affect the airline's reputation?" A young woman, still holding her phone to record the video, chimed in, "I'm going to post this online. People need to know what's going on in first class." Meanwhile, the old lady sitting near the window muttered, "I've never seen a flight attendant act like that. It's so embarrassing." Lauren stood still, her hands still clutching the food tray, trying to keep her face stoic, but her heart was starting to flutter. Sarah, her coworker, stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Lauren, are you crazy? The manager won't forgive this. He's Elijah Carter. Do you know how much his company spends on airlines every year?" Lauren turned to Sarah, her voice harsh. "I don't care. He has no right to treat me like shit. I've had enough." But as she finished speaking, she felt a chill run down her spine, knowing she had just crossed a line of no return. Behind him, the captain heard the news over the radio from the crew. He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and said to the co-pilot, "We have a problem here. A VIP was kicked out of first class. Management won't let that go." The co-pilot shook his head. "That flight attendant is definitely done for." Meanwhile, Elijah, now sitting in an empty seat in business class, looked out the window with a blank look. He heard whispers from nearby passengers. "Is that Elijah Carter? I didn't expect him to be treated like that." Another whispered, "But he's too much. Who would pick a fight with a flight attendant like that?" Elijah clenched his fists on the armrests of his seat, his pride deeply wounded. He told himself, "She's going to pay. No one is allowed to insult me without consequences." But deep down, he felt a little uneasy. Was he really right to let things go this far? Lauren, back in the service area, sat down in a secluded corner, her face in her hands. She heard the footsteps of her colleagues, the questioning glances and the whispers. She just caused a big scandal. She wondered if she had done the right thing, or if she had simply let her anger control her. The flight landed in London with a heavy atmosphere. Elijah, as soon as he got off the plane, called the airline's management, sent a detailed email complaining about Lauren's behavior, along with a threat to withdraw his company's transportation contract if disciplinary action was not taken immediately. He sat in the VIP lounge, a cup of coffee in his hand, his eyes still burning with anger. He told himself he was right, but deep down, he felt a little empty that this victory did not bring him the joy he had expected. Meanwhile, Lauren was called to meet her manager at Heathrow Airport. She walked into a small office and was confronted by her strict but fair manager, Mrs. Anna. Mrs. Anna sighed and put the documents down on the table. "Lauren, you kicked a VIP passenger out of first class, insulted him in front of everyone, and forced security to intervene. I can no longer protect you. The airline has decided to fire you, effective immediately." Lauren bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't regret confronting Elijah, but it pained her to think about the flight attendant dream she had once cherished. As she left the office, she dragged her small suitcase out of the airport, pausing outside to look up at the gray London sky. The planes roared as they took off, and she whispered, "Maybe I don't belong here anymore." Elijah, waiting for his next flight, looked out the lounge window. He remembered Lauren's defiant gaze, and a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Was he really right to push things this far? But he quickly dismissed the thought, boarding the next flight with his usual stoic expression. Lauren, standing in the bustling airport, smiled faintly. Despite losing her job, she felt relieved that she had stood up for herself, even if it cost her her career.